Welcome to CFO Panel, Top Concerns for Companies in H2 of 2020, presented by the FEI Twin Cities chapter. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, we would like to share some information regarding CPE credits with you, and we appreciate your patience. To be eligible for CPE credit, you must answer at least 3 of the 4 polling questions on the slide screen during the webinar and have a total viewing time of at least 50 minutes. Today's webinar is worth 1 continuing professional education credit. Participants will have the opportunity to download their CPE certificate immediately following the webinar if the above requirements are met. In accordance with the standards for the National Registry of CPE sponsors, CPE credit will be granted based on a 50-minute hour. We are unable to grant CPE credit in cases where technical difficulties disqualify eligibility. CPE program sponsorship guidelines prohibit us from issuing credit to those not verified by the technology to have satisfied the minimum requirements listed above. I encourage you to download today's PowerPoint presentation, which is located in the Resources widget on the lower right-hand side of the screen. After the presentation, this webinar will be available on the FEI member site where you can replay and download. After the conclusion of the webinar, your CPE certificate will be available in the Certification widget and will also be emailed within 24 hours should you meet the criteria. Below the speaker biography widget is the Q&A box. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and the speakers will answer as many questions as possible. It's now FEI's pleasure to introduce Anne Loughrey. Anne?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Anne Loughrey. It's a hard last name, so glad that you all could join us today for this great topic, top concerns for companies in the second half of 2020. So today we have about 50 to 1 hour's worth of content that we're going to talk about. We've got 3 panelists. I'll have them introduce themselves in just a minute here. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about things that are very relevant for you right now in your business. We're going to talk a little bit about the impacts of COVID-19, how that's impacted you and your team's ability to get the work done, and also talk about PPP loans and some of the things around that. So as we were talking about at the front end, we have 4 polling questions, so we'll keep everybody on their toes, and they'll be very interesting and good questions, and the panelists will respond to those. So without further ado, I am going to have each of our 3 wonderful panelists introduce themselves. They'll give you a little bit of background about who they are and where they work. And I think I'll toss it over to our first panelist. I should have introduced myself. I'm Anne Loughrey. I work with Salo. And our first panelist is Dave Rust, who is the CFO of Salo. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Anne. Like Anne said, my name is Dave Rust. I'm the CFO here at Salo. We work in finance, HR, and accounting, senior level contract staffing and search. I've been here for 4.5 years, and in that time, I've been really focused on building a really strong finance team where we've focused on improving technology and reporting tools and partnering with our business to improve our business planning and strategic planning and our analytical support. Prior to that, I was with Northwest and Delta Airlines for a combined 11 years, I think. I had about 6 jobs during that time, and all the way through bankruptcy, the merger, and then a period of some pretty tremendous growth and investment. And prior to that, I was in financial services with RBC and Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo. And I will kick it over to Jim.
Thanks, Dave. Jim Saboro. I am the CFO of EQ Holdings, and as the name implies, we are a holding company. We have holdings around 4 asset classes. One is majority-owned companies that we own and operate. Second one is minority companies, and we do that through direct investments in the minority companies themselves. Also through funds, so we're invested in 10 funds between venture capital, private equity, and mezzanine debt. And then the last 2 asset classes are real estate and cash. I've been at EQ Holdings for 3.5 months, and you might wonder why someone would make a change during a pandemic. One of the things that was compelling to me was the fact that I get to spend time on the holding company level, but also still keep my feet in as a operating CFO we have shared services that we offer to our 3 majority-owned businesses. So I get to stay involved in that. Prior to coming to EQ Holdings, I was a CFO at Phillips and Temro Industries, a Tier 1 supplier in the automotive, heavy-duty truck, off-road vehicle, and power generation markets. I was there for 5 years, and prior to that spent 10 years at Caton Corporation, which designs and distributes parts and supplies for printers and copiers to 10,000 customers in 150 countries. So those were my previous 2 CFO stints. And with that, I will turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Jim. Rachel Rice, CFO of Padilla, and Padilla is a communication, marketing, branding, and public relations or PR agency. Been at Padilla for almost 2 years, and Padilla had been purchased by a Canadian holding company, so I oversee Padilla and then also 2 other agencies within the U.S. And previously, I was with a software technology company for about 18 years. I took it as a startup, and then we sold it internationally. So it's a really fun experience for that. And I also serve on 2 boards as well. So, and I think now we go to a polling question. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Michelle?
Here's our first polling question. Generally speaking, how has your company been impacted by COVID-19? Please be sure to make your selections on the screen and press submit. And don't forget to submit any questions you have throughout the presentation today through the Q&A box. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds left to make your responses, and we'll move to the results.
Yes, while we wait for the responses, please feel free to enter your questions. We will have time at the end for some questions from the audience. And then after you vote on this polling question, each of our panelists are going to answer this question. And I think our first panelist that's going to be answering the question is going to be back to Rachel again. But we're still waiting for, oh, here we go. Here are the answers. It looks like most of you are saying negatively, a few positively, and then a few neutral. So interesting, responses here. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how your business has been impacted by COVID.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ann. So we did have some negatives, but we've also had positives. I'll start with the negative. Our revenues were impacted. We are roughly 10% in a decline over last year. Could have been larger, but due to diversity in our offerings, we're up in some areas, we're also down in other areas. We also had early on April, May timeframe, March as well, that clients put hold on some of our projects, and they're now starting to progress, but with that lag in there, we're missing revenues from that as well. So on a positive, we've had some positives. One is for cash flow. So we had more time to focus on collections, so we did that. And then we also, with our account staff, they had a little more time as well to help the finance team getting that cash in from clients. And to be honest, in March and April, I really thought we were going to struggle in this area. I thought it was going to be so difficult to get cash in from clients. We had assumed that everybody would hold on to their cash. And as Padilla not being that must-have payment for a lot of our clients, we thought we would kind of be on last of the list and they would delay those payments as long as possible. But to our surprise, that did not take place. Clients kept paying. We then, of course, in turn, were able to pay our vendors on time. So we were very fortunate with the cash flow position to be able to maintain that. Another positive we had as well is, a lot lower travel expenses. So there had been a lot of client travel, and that actually went from very large amounts now to zero. So which I never thought could take place. Didn't think that could happen. And then one other positive was, productivity. So we did have a large uptick in our productivity, people working from home, not being distracted on other things. We were able to see, even though we had lower revenues with the projects we are working on, the productivity has increased. So that definitely was a positive as well. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jim. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so From a holding company standpoint, one of the things we continue to look for acquisitions for wholly owned as well as minority positions. And we saw through the first 6 weeks a significant reduction in deal flow, just as companies put their processes on hold. That has since come back. There have been, again, some companies have been positively impacted or have pivoted in a way that shows some resiliency. So that has come back a little bit. Among the 3 businesses that we own, one's a supplements, herbal supplement business, and with some increased interest in immune system, kind of being able to boost your immune system, there's been a slight positive impact with that business from the pandemic. One of our businesses does data replication hardware and imaging imaging consumables. And one of the markets served there, primary market served is medical. And with medical procedures, elective medical procedures being significantly down, that business is off by 25 to 30% relative to prior year. And then the last business does compute and storage solutions and selling through VARs to small businesses who might be looking to upgrade a network. That business is essentially shut down. There's not much going on there. However, that's been offset by another segment that we serve, which is content delivery networks. So if you think about Google, a YouTube channel as an example, Netflix that uses our solutions, that business with more people working from home and spending more entertainment time at home has actually offset some of the negative impact that we've seen there. So that business has been somewhat neutral. So Dave?
Yeah, I think we actually, it took a little bit longer than we were expecting at the beginning, but then we did experience a pretty steep decline. I think, once companies similar to us got through doing some various scenario planning and kind of hunkering down, I think a lot of companies similar to us were really trying to, protect jobs as much as possible and wait things out. It has, I'd say, so we kind of the first month, I'd say we were pretty steady, and then we had a pretty rough 3 months in a row, but the last 2 months, things have stabilized a bit. And we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick, which has been good. Very similar to Rachel as far as some positives. Cash and collections have been, I think, much better than we would have expected, and I've heard that theme from others as well. And then we had, pretty good cost savings, obviously, on things like M&E and travel, and then productivity. I think our people really adopted the new way of working really quickly. So it was really fun to see how people came together. And then also, from a positive perspective as well, we think that this potentially helps us longer term as it really kind of speeds up some trends and things that are helpful for firms like Salo. I think the nature of work from home and flexible work arrangements, that's kind of right in our wheelhouse. And some technology things that we've been working on, it really it kind of sped the change curve with that internally, and then from a client perspective, it's made clients more open to having consultants work remotely. So that gives us a different type of reach potentially than we've had in the past, and then I think it also longer term helps us potentially in that, clients can rethink how they think about their resources and what roles they need to own versus what roles might be opportunistic for flexible models like Salo provides. So that's kind of the continuation of the gig economy as it moves from kind of task worker to more senior level roles, which is really where we operate. I will kick it back over to Ann.
Thank you, panelists. I did hear a couple of really good themes there. People are being more productive, and it seems like cash collections have gone well for many of you. To keep our panelists on their toes, I have a sub-question on this one, which we'll see how they do. I'm sure they'll do great. The sub-question was, how has your company been leveraging technology differently to navigate the pandemic? And I think both Jim and Rachel are going to answer that one. I think, Jim, you're up first for how are you using technology?
Yep, thanks, Ann. We have not been using new technology. We already had video conference capabilities, and that was part of what we were doing with some of our remote or international locations. What we've seen, probably the biggest change is just obviously the amount of use, and almost using it exclusively. But not really the adoption of any new technologies through this. I have identified some workflow gaps potentially where we might be able to leverage technology a little more effectively going forward in the areas of accounts payable, for example, and some of the workflow we have with invoices. So that's one of the other things that's come out of it. And the last thing I want to highlight is our investment thesis from a holding company standpoint is to look for digital transformation opportunities to disrupt industries or to gain efficiencies or demand generation through digital transformation. And one of the things, and some of the funds most of the funds we're invested in, our fund partners have similar types of theses. And one of the things that's really become apparent has been the increased adoption by users of technology. Dave already kind of referenced the work from home, and companies have become a lot more comfortable with that. And as we progress and to some level of normalcy, there'll probably be a lot more working from home and remote working from contractors, et cetera. And we think that it's probably pushed that forward 3 to 5 years. And you can look at the same thing in telehealth as another example, or even restaurants. Now you can walk in and scan a QR code and get a menu and do a lot more contactless things. So it's really just been the acceleration of the adoption of technology, which we have noticed. So Rachel?
Thanks. Yes, for us, luckily we had transitioned most of our platforms to the cloud, our ERP system, time tracking, our file sharing. So this part of the transition to working from home was seamless. The challenge we had was changing the mindset of using video conferencing technology. This industry has a heavy focus on in-person meetings, lots of client travel. Video meetings was not natural for our employees at all. It was very difficult at first. They did embrace that challenge by turning on the cameras. If you're using a video conferencing technology platform and only doing audio and don't have your camera on, you're not fully utilizing that technology. And then we, implemented Microsoft Teams or Zoom. So we actually have both platforms, and we allow employees to choose what will work best for them and what they're most comfortable with. But yeah, just being in the cloud for a lot of our technology was a huge help. Employees don't have to use the VPN, which can slow you down, or if the connection's lost. Being in the cloud with most people having that internet connection was seamless for us. And I think we go to a polling question now.
Yes, that is correct. We are on our second of 4 polling questions. I think it's going to come up here. This one is a 3-part question. And the question is, did your company apply for a PPP loan? Answers are yes, no, or no, we were not eligible. So if you will go ahead and put your answer in and give us a few minutes here to tally up those results, we will respond to that question with our panelists in just a minute here. And I believe in terms of the panelists, we are going to have Dave start off with that one after we get our results.
Don't forget to press submit. Let me give you about 10 more seconds left to make your responses, and we'll move to the results.
Thank you. All right, it looks like 55% of you said yes, and it looks about like 27 were not eligible, and 17 just said no. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about his organization's response to this question.
Yeah, so thank you, Anne. For us, I look at it as it worked as the program was intended. It really allowed us to pause and plan and allow the environment to develop before we were forced to make decisions. So, we've been focused very early on cost cuts to protect as many jobs as possible. And PPP allowed us to really kind of weather the storm during Q2 in particular, and really make very different decisions than I think we would have probably been forced to make if in the absence of the PPP. I think the other thing as far as how the PPP loan has affected our planning for 2020 is just like with COVID in general, it just really is focused or made us focus on being nimble. When you're unveiling a $3 trillion program in a short amount of time, like the Treasury and SBA did, you can't get all the details. So we, like many others who took the loan or who probably looked at it and were trying to figure out if it made sense for them. We were trying to sift through and work with our advisors to really understand the program, and then throughout, the program's been changing as well. So just making sure that we're really staying on top of that and making good long-term decisions with that. So that's how we've been doing it at Salo, and I'll kick it over to you, Jim, to hear how you guys have been doing it.
Yeah, I think similarly, we didn't really change. It didn't really change the way we viewed our operations. We really saw it as replacing lost cash flow from reduced revenues. And I'll echo what Dave said. I think the program had it met its intended intent in that we did consider some headcount actions early on, salary reductions, that kind of thing. And with the PPP loan and maybe a hope of a V recovery, thinking that if we could get a V recovery, that we would be able to avoid some of those actions. We are now on the other side of that in terms of using up all of our loan amount and feel confident about our forgiveness position. And with that, then we did move forward with some headcount reductions and some a reduced salary for at least a temporary period of time. So again, I would echo what Dave said, that it did have its intended impact in terms of how we reacted. And as a finance organization, again, similar to what Dave's going through, we're just trying to stay on top of the program, how it's being administered, what we need to do, and now starting to tackle the forgiveness portion of it has been time consuming from a finance standpoint. And I know Rachel did not apply for a loan, so I'm going to kick it back over to Ann.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Jim. We have a follow-on question to that, and it's a little bit broader of a question, and it's really, what is your greatest financial concern for 2020? And we'll let Rachel take this one.
Thanks, Ann. Yes, my biggest concern is new business development. So we are going to have this lag. We've been able to close and win deals that, the process had started before the pandemic. That we could meet face-to-face, and our pitches that we had won by being in the room with the clients. Now it's going to be more difficult to reach out and also make that real connection when we can't meet the people in person. We'll definitely have some referral business, but we'll have a slowdown in our net new business. That will affect us this year, and then also a lot of it could affect us next year as well. Another concern of mine is client and staff getting burned out in Q4. This is such an unusual year. We're all working harder. We're doing things so differently. Productivity's increased, which is amazing. But are we going to have a burnout in our staff in Q4 or clients? Are they just going to kind of put things on hold again or delay certain projects? So yeah, my two biggest concerns are, net new business development, those new revenues coming in, and then also burnout and lower productivity for the remainder of the year and probably going into next year as well. So, and Jim, do you have thoughts for that one?
Yes, mine are really around top line. We have an internal process where we have our three businesses every month kind of reforecast the rest of the year. We couldn't even really reforecast the next month, and we really put the whole reforecast process top line on hold. At least again going out to the end of the year, and started just to look at, okay, can we have some kind of predictive ability for what's going to happen in the next month? So it's really the uncertainty around that which obviously has a downhill impact or downstream impact of what does that mean from a cost structure standpoint and operational standpoint as well. So it's just really the uncertainty around revenue, which is the biggest concern that I have for the year. So I'll turn it back over to Ann.
All right, great. Well, we're going to keep everybody on their toes, and we are going to have our third polling question come up. I love this question. It has so many potential answers. Seems like it should be a fairly simple question, but the question is your company returning to the office in 2020? And the answers that you could possibly answer are yes, no, undetermined, or partially. And so I'll give everybody a few minutes to answer that question for whether or not your company is returning to the office in 2020. And then we will have our panelists kind of talk through some of their plans once we get the answers from the audience. All right, it looks like we have a lot of undetermined or partially. We've got a few folks that said yes, 22%, 11% said straight up no. And I will turn it over to my CFO, Dave Rust, to hear whether or not I will be returning to the office in 2020. So Dave, tell me, what am I doing?
Yeah, thank you, Ann. So at Salo, we are in the partially bucket, and we have, like I think everybody, we've really been trying to focus on safety as the number one thing, but then also making sure that we have a user-friendly experience and that we've got this just logistically planned out, because it is pretty incredible, I would say, the amount of planning that our facilities people have had to go through to make it work for us. And so we surveyed and spent a lot of time listening to our employee base to, one, hear what their comfort level was, but then also really try to get a sense of why, what was their interest in going back, what were the things that they missed, and try to get a sense of whether, they wanted to go back just because they missed their friends, in which case there's a lot of different ways to handle that, or if there were different things that they missed about the interactions in the office. And so we really listened, and then we made it optional for August. And so based on the kind of the volume of people interested, we just decided to do 1 day a week to start. And that allows us to really kind of test things out and pilot it. And so far, so good. We're on our second day now. But the idea then is to really, make some changes, listen and to our employees again, and then continue to evolve and potentially expand depending on the demand from our employee base. Rachel, how about you guys?
Thanks. Yeah, we had done a lot of that as well. Our original plan was to return at roughly 25% capacity, but only in our Minneapolis and Richmond offices. Then we had pushed it to, this was June, and then we pushed it to like July 20th, and now we've actually pushed it out to Labor Day. So due to the rising cases, we haven't really reopened Minneapolis or Richmond. And then we have our larger regions of New York, Boston, and San Fran. And, employees aren't comfortable riding in the mass transit into work. So we will not reopen those 3 larger offices this year at all. We haven't determined when we're opening them, but it will not be in 2020. Staff's not comfortable driving in, or having mass transit into the office. And we are, even now in discussions, do we just keep all of our offices closed, until June of 2021, just like a lot of technology companies do and some of the larger ones. So, and then also we do believe when we do start coming back, keeping the capacity lower, maybe only at 50% at first, and kind of layering it and staggering it to see how things go. And then we are thinking about our office space differently, so we are thinking of keeping the same amount of space, but how do we reconfigure it to, either spread out workstations, keep people social distance, or do we add larger collaboration spaces, which I know that sounds a little counterintuitive right now, but we believe in the future, most employees will want to work from home most of the week. They might only come in 1 or 2 days a week. And when they do that, we believe they'll want collaboration space to do that. So when they're coming into the office, they know it's to collaborate with other individuals. And so we need a larger space for that to be able to spread people out. So yeah, still keeping a lot of the same office space, but how can we do things a little differently going forward, to meet the needs of our staff.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Now we have kind of a broader question that still kind of addresses the whole return to office, but it's a little bit different question for the panelists. And that is, what have you learned from the pandemic that has helped influence how you might think about other, quote, once in a lifetime type events? And we're going to keep Rachel on here, and she'll be the first one to answer this question. So go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Anne. So yeah, this has been quite a crazy year. I think first and foremost, what we've learned to influence our approach is, resilience and patience. Especially patience when this first took place. We all just wanted it to end as quickly as possible. Let's try and get back to either the new normal, now normal, whatever we want to call it. But now we're all realizing we're in for a longer time frame. We've got to have patience for that. Now we are all in this together. So we've had at least one worldwide event that has taken place. So, that belief that we can handle it and we can tackle anything that does come our way. And having an infinite mindset, you got to be in reinvention mode. What could we be? What do we need to change? How proactive can we be for any other future events? And then just making sure we don't have any complacency, no regrets. Another thing to be thoughtful of is, we're all making imperfect decisions also by imperfect people. So we have to be comfortable with that. And of course, last, we need to move quickly. Yeah, when items like this, the worldwide events or even once in a lifetime events take place, you have to move quickly. You can't delay decisions, and you have to be comfortable with that as well. So Jim, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think for us, it kind of reinforced the following approach. Number one, early identification, scanning, you've got to consistently scan the horizon for risks or potential risks.
Yeah, I'm doing one now. So.
Secondly,
but I got it.
Secondly, facing
the final link went out incorrectly. So the last 15 people that signed up didn't have.
If everybody could have their line on mute, that would be helpful. Second one would be kind of really facing the reality and finding the right balance, not overreacting, but taking the threat seriously enough. And that's obviously easier said than done. And kind of piggybacking on what Rachel said, kind of being decisive relatively quickly, taking action. And that doesn't just mean, cost actions. It's how do you grow revenue? How do you pivot the business to do something maybe, differently or get into new markets or do something that might take advantage of the situation that's being presented. And then the fourth thing, and a key thing for us, was transparent communication about how we were reacting to our employees. And I can't take any credit for this because I joined while this was already happening. But we really communicated, there were 4 pillars for us. One of them was, number one, and it was in this order, was safety of our employees. We did have operations that were deemed essential and employees that had been working since this started at many of our facilities. So that was number one, safety of our employees. Number 2 was, how do we take care of our customers? We still have customer needs, and that was the second most important thing. The third thing was, how do we preserve shareholder value through this? And the fourth thing is, are there opportunities that we can do to create value in the future, decisions we can take now to do that? And so we were communicating with employees every 2 weeks and through the lens of those 4 things and all the decisions that were being made. And I think that the feedback we got from employees on that was they felt very good about the the direction that we were doing and the decisions that we were making, and appreciated the fact they were able to be kept up to date as frequently as they were. They really felt like they knew what was going on, and that was probably to me the biggest takeaway in this. Dave?
Yeah, I think one of the things is just, first I think it's important to prepare for quote unquote once in a lifetime events about every 10 years. So I think what this has taught us is that, this might be a once in a lifetime pandemic, but these things happen pretty frequently, whether it's the .com bubble or the financial crisis, whatever it might be. And then, this year, obviously with COVID and social unrest. So you really have to prepare for these things to happen and not be surprised when something big happens. And you have to build a business that's flexible and resilient that can adapt to change quickly. And, that starts with strong leadership. So having a team that can adjust and adapt quickly and like both Jim and Rachel said, make decisions really decisively and quickly, often with, imperfect information, and certainly in this case, not having a great view of what the future holds, right? And then communication is very key, being transparent, keeping things simple, and being in front of your employees regularly. And then I think another thing that we found, and this probably sounds a little bit simple and possibly cliche, but you have to have really good people. It just reinforces that. When you're working from home, you have to be able to have people that you can trust when you're not looking, right? And we're very fortunate to have great people that we can trust and who have, in a lot, probably most cases, gone above and beyond what we would have expected working from home, and probably, in a lot of cases, what they would have been able to get done in the office. And then I think the last thing is just, this is not a surprise, but you have to have an intelligent use of technology, because it just allows you to be more flexible. Technology is rarely the answer on its own, but I think if you have good processes and can find ways to embrace technology that complements your existing processes, then you're going to do well. Next, I think we have a polling question.
Yep, that's right, Dave. We have a polling question next, and this is our fourth polling question. But just as a reminder to write any questions that you have for our panelists in the question box. We'll answer those at the end. This question is, would you prefer to work from home regularly? Yes, no, partially, or I don't know yet. And so while you are putting in your answers for that, we will get ready for our panelists to answer that question for y'all, to see if they prefer to work from home regularly. And I think the first person that is going to be answering that is, looks like Dave. You're going to be up on that one. Oh, very interesting. A lot of partially and a lot of yeses. So,
all right. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm definitely interested in working from home regularly. It's something that we had already started to put plans in place for. We've been looking at our facilities even prior to this, and looking at new technologies that can allow us to work more remotely. So I have found a lot of positives. I do miss a lot of things about being in the office. I miss the energy of it. But I think companies that can create space and create a place where people want to show up, but then have the flexibility to work from home when it makes more sense to work from home. Those are the places that are going to be able to attract talent. I think Jim is next.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of those things, Dave. I have been going through a transition of leaving a company and starting a new company. Doing both of those things remotely was a little bit surreal at first. But with the technology, I felt I was able to onboard a interim CFO as I was exiting my previous company, and that seemed to work relatively smoothly. Likewise, I came into EQ Holdings with an interim CFO who was in place, and our transition was relatively smooth as well, despite the fact that we never met in person. So I do think I can work effectively from home. I think the finance staff has worked effectively from home, and most of the people in our company has. I do think there's a balance. There are things that you miss by not having the ability to collaborate in person in a conducive space. But I think we'll strike a good balance, hopefully, have the ability to strike a good balance of giving people a lot more flexibility while maintaining some of the positive things about being in the office. And Rachel.
Thanks. Yeah, this has been a roller coaster for some of us, especially, finance leaders or the finance teams. Most of us weren't used to working from home, at least on a regular basis. We'd work from home from time to time only. So at first, this was a really big difference for certain individuals. In each department at certain companies were already working from home, but not all. Even though we had the capabilities to do it, we didn't. And then now that we're kind of, I would say, used to working from home, we changed our minds. There are a lot of benefits to it. So yeah, we're going to be in that partial category where most of us will probably work from home half the time, the other half the time being in the office. Because yeah, definitely being in the office, the collaboration and seeing people in person is, a good benefit as well. But it's great to have the flexibility. And I believe this pandemic, definitely showed the others of us that hadn't worked from home that it can be done easily and should be used. Not having that commute into the office is really nice. So that's been a plus.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I know. So we have about 15 minutes left of this webinar. And so we have been getting some questions from the audience. And so feel free now to submit other ones. I do have one that I'm going to start off with. And I guess the panelists can take it, whoever wants to answer it first. But the question that came from the audience is, are you expecting companies to have turnover in the finance function as the pandemic continues and then hopefully fades? So kind of the question is really around expectations for turnover. So people leaving, or maybe even organizations being able to do, more with less. So I don't know which of you panelists wants to take that one. Looks like Rachel.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I will take that one. Sorry about that. From what we're seeing, in our industry, and then from others I've been talking to, I think it'll be dependent on revenue generation. So if the revenues are staying in place or pretty close to whole, I do believe finance teams will stay intact because there's a lot of things that can still be done. Now, if the revenues are going to decline sharply, I think it would be probably an easy bet to say that some finance staff would be either laid off or furloughed until revenues came back. Even though with technology, you can create a lot of efficiencies and should be done always. But I think there's always other projects finance teams and individuals can work on and should be doing and being proactive with those.
Yeah, and this is Jim. I'll chime in here. I've actually been hiring a little bit on our finance team as we had quite a few contractors in, and I have been pleasantly surprised by the quality of candidates that we've got that we've been able to attract at kind of several different levels, and some of that might be because they may be looking because they lack confidence in their current organization in terms of the ability to withstand or recover from this. But it has been somewhat surprising that we've been able to attract really talented people, and it's actually, quite frankly, been beyond just the finance group as well, as we've looked at other parts of the organization and have had some hiring needs that we've filled over the last couple of months.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen is it's a little bit dependent on what's kind of going on with those companies or those industries, and it also depends on role. but I think, there definitely are pockets of surprising strength that we've seen. And I think it also depends on what kind of finance's role is in an organization, right? If it's pretty limited to reporting on the past and closing the books and things, and not kind of on the more value add partnering and helping business leaders make decisions, I think those things those types of groups will grow and shrink with the size of the business. But I think in other teams that are really adding value and helping business leaders not just look at the past but also figure out the future and do scenario planning and things, those groups that's very in demand, right? And now so more than ever in a lot of instances.
All right, thank you, panelists. We've got another question that has come in from the audience, and it's about growth. So, oh man, lots of questions. So the next one is, how are companies approaching bringing back or growing top-line revenues in this new environment? So what are your strategies or plans to grow revenues as we start to look ahead to the future? And Dave, since you're the last one up, I think we'll have you start.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, we've really pivoted in how we're looking at it, and we similar to a lot of companies, we started with our strategic plan, and as things have changed, we've adjusted, and it creates some opportunities in certain areas and creates challenges in others, and we've really just tried to relook at everything. And so you kind of you start with getting very tactical, making it through, Q2, for instance, to survive. But now looking at, okay, how do we grow? What are the opportunities? And then how do we go capture those opportunities? So you kind of have to really pull out that whole strategic plan and just redo it in a lot of instances. And I'll kick that to Jim or Rachel.
Yeah, with kind of different answers with our three businesses. We had a new product launch in one of our businesses that we have deferred, that we're now going to kick off in September, and to do it much more remotely than we would have otherwise. So that's one of the areas where we pivoted, was just kind of the delivery of how we're going to do the product launch. Initially, the thought was, well, we'll just hold off until things return to normal. But as it became clear that was going to be a ways off, we had to look at a different approach of doing it. The other thing we've done in one of our other businesses was accelerate kind of the transition towards strategic accounts and how we approach them. And they happen to be the same accounts that are really delivering the content, over cloud. And which obviously is a growing segment in this environment. So we really accelerated our investment in that area and our how we're going to market. Rachel, anything to add?
Sure, yeah, a lot of the same points there. And, we're definitely looking at our different offerings. So which offerings are increasing during the pandemic and then which ones are not. And then we can put that extra emphasis and focus on those certain offerings in that short term. Again, one of my concerns is the new business development, which I think a lot of companies will face that. So it's just figuring out other avenues and then, also getting those referrals in and then making sure you can, for your existing clients that know and love you, what other services do they need or what they need but don't know it yet. That's always the low-hanging fruit.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We have about 10 minutes left in the webinar, and I do have another really good question that came in from the audience, and it's really related to kind of the office space. So as we start to think about people working from home and being more productive, do you see reducing your footprint as we learn to work remotely? And then there was a question for you specifically, Rachel, because you were talking about your productivity being favorable. What does that suggest about the long-term viability of your current space, and how might you use that space in the future? I know kind of a multiple choice question, but really try to think about like your office needs for the future. And I'll let Rachel take it.
Yeah. Thanks. That's a great question. So on the productivity front, yeah, realizing that not only can we all work from home, but productivity has increased, which was definitely a surprise. So we, of course, want to continue that trend. So if people are going to be more productive working from home and they're able to do so, we definitely want to keep that going. So it will be up to the employees if they would return to the office or not. We actually won't make anybody return even long after this is over. If somebody really does want to work from home 5 days a week and rarely go into the office, we'll be fine with that. And our office plans, at this moment, of course, it could change, but we are thinking of keeping our same footprint. Now we have to decide, do we design it differently? Do we just spread out the workstations? Do we have more collaboration spaces, knowing that most employees will work from home probably most of the time? But having the option, of course, we do brainstorming sessions with our creative teams. So at times they do want to be in person in a larger space, having these brainstorming sessions. So you still will need office space, and it's going to be critical for that. But yeah, it's trying to find that right blend and balance that will work, and it could be very different for each organization. But I don't see us decreasing our foot space at this point in time.
And I'll add something a little different. As one of the areas we invest in is real estate. We purchased a building that was new to us in 2019. Spent a year kind of retrofitting it and moved in the beginning of March for a week or two before we could no longer use the building. Again, that was before I started. But a great space, a lot of technology, a lot of collaboration space. And then we also, the second phase of that was kind of as an owner operator, leasing out the first floor of this particular building. We took the second floor to 1 or 2 tenants. We've come to the realization that we likely could get away with less space. And we've changed our marketing with the existing space that we have. If somebody is interested in the entire building, we probably would entertain that. And despite how disruptive it would be to move again, given that was just done in March, that we would consider doing that, because we could, quite frankly, do the same thing with probably 60% of the space, or maybe even 50% of the space, given what we think is going to happen with kind of long-term people working a lot more remotely.
Yeah, I think for us, pre-COVID, we were starting to outgrow our existing space, so we had started a project to look at reusing our space differently and actually moving toward more flexible work environment and more work from home. And similar to both Jim and Rachel, really looking at how we create more collaborative space. Again, with the thought of trying to make it be a place that people want to be. And so attracting people in because of that, and not because of technology or something like that the technology experience wasn't as good at home. So that's kind of how we were approaching it to begin with, and we were like I said, kind of starting to outgrow the space, so we were starting to look at potentially taking on more space. And I think now this really has just accelerated the curve of adoption of work from home and hoteling and more flexible arrangements. So for us, it allows us to just continue to grow within our existing space.
All right, we have only 5 minutes left, and a question came in for Dave Rust, and I think this is a good question. It was really around consultants that are working out at client locations where the client is working in the office. And the question was really, how are you handling that? And, what precautions are you taking on behalf of the consultants?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's one that we had to deal with pretty early. We actually moved to work from home early. I think it was mid-March. And we did have some consultants who were working at client sites, and so we quickly had to figure out how we wanted to approach that. So, number one is we want to make sure that our consultants are comfortable if they are being asked to work at a client site, and then working with the clients to make sure that we understand the plans and that proper safety measures are taken, so that it creates a safe environment.
That's great. I think I knew that answer, Dave. We have time for one last question I'm going to end it with this question, and I'm going to give a challenge to the presenters. They're going to have to answer it differently. Okay, so let's just see how these guys can think on their feet here. And the question is, what is the most important leadership trait that you are relying on during this time? And to give the benefit to my colleague, Dave Rust, I will let him start with that question. And then we'll pass it over to Rachel and Jim. And we're going to look for some differences in the answers here.
All right. So it's hard to pick one thing. I'll say one thing is I got very good advice early on from one of our founders, and that is that that the whole organization will be watching the finance team. So make sure that you're acting in a way that communicates that you've got it and things are solid. So that's one thing. And then I think the main thing is just with the team being a leader that your people want to work for. So helping with prioritization. We had 3 key things that was really what we focused on. One was focus on cash. Another was making sure that we were doing communicating close and reporting on time. And then last was scenario planning. And then I guess as far as leadership traits, again, kind of goes with the prioritization, but make sure that you're understanding of your people, because people are, they became teachers, they became, they had to be daycare providers, they had to take care of elderly parents, whatever it might be. And so just having flexibility and like I said, being somebody that you'd want to work for. I guess Jim or Rachel.
Yeah, just say, did we lose Rachel? Or I'll go ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much, everyone. Anne, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, we were just kind of wrapping up on that leadership question. But if we've run out of time, I think we want to just thank everybody for attending the webinar, and hopefully you took some takeaways from this session, and we thank you for participating.
Thank you so much. This marks the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us today in the certification widget. Your CPE certificate will also be available to download in the thank you for attending email that will be sent within the next 24 hours. If you have any questions regarding CPE credits, please feel free to email conf@financialexecutives.org. Have a wonderful day, and again, thank you to our speakers for today's webinar.